All right. And then remind me to please, when we do Tanya, to stop and start the recording. Okay. So today, it's a major, major part in history. And yesterday's Chumash, we started learning about the exile, the beginning of the exile of the Jewish people. And today, we're going to start learning about the birth of Moses, the Redeemer. You know how, like we always say, there's Hashem always provides the cure when there's a sickness. So right here, Moshe is being born. So remember, we keep on saying how it was 86 years from when the affliction of the Egyptians really started getting bad, when they really started persecuting the Jewish people, was the last 86 years. How old is Moses when? How old is Moshe when the Jews leave Egypt? Moshe's 80 years old. So Moses was born right at the beginning of when the affliction of the Jewish people got very tough. And today we're going to learn a very important part of a very important class about how Moshe Rabbeinu is born. A fascinating story. And join me as we start. We're still holding where the slavery is getting worse and worse. And in yesterday's Chumash we learned that the king of Egypt, his stargazers told him that there will be a boy who will be born who will take the Jewish people out of Egypt. And he tells the Jewish midwives who oversaw the birth of the Jewish mothers to telling them that they should kill the boys that are born. And in yesterday's Chumash we learned that they were very brave. They didn't listen to Paro, and they, of course, did not kill the Jewish boys. Verse 18, Vayikra melech Mitzrayim l'miyaldos. So the king of Egypt called the midwives. And he says to them, why did you do this thing? And you allowed the children to be born, to live. Why did you do this thing? Why did you do this? You're not keeping what I told you. I told you very clearly not to allow them to live. Why are you allowing them to live? So verse 19, what's the excuse? What is the excuse that the Jewish midwives are going to say? So the Jewish midwives say to Pharaoh, the Jewish women that were helping them deliver their baby, they're not like the regular Egyptian women. They are like chayos. And herein lies their excuse. And there's one of two ways to say that. There's two ways to explain what the word chayos means. Either chayos means that they are talented themselves like midwives. So I guess if the woman's a midwife, they could deal with it on their own because they're very talented and they're able to give birth on their own, and therefore they don't need us. So they're not calling us, so we can't kill the baby boys. And the second answer is they're like chayos, means they're like wild animals. Another way that Rashi explains it. And just like a wild animal doesn't need a midwife to have a baby, these women are like animals. And therefore, they don't need us. So they're not calling us, and we don't have the opportunity to fulfill your command and kill the Jewish baby boys that are born. You asked us as soon as they're born that we should do a job on the babies born and kill them. We're not able to do it because they're not calling us, because they're like wild, they're like animals. They just have the babies on their own. They're not calling our company to help them deliver the babies. Rashi just adds something interesting. Where do we find that the Jewish women were like animals? And Rashi says, well, we have many cases like that the Jewish women are like animals. We see all the slaves, all the sons are compared to animals. The tribe of Yehuda is like a lion. Benjamin is like a wolf, right? Joseph is like an ox. Another one's like a gazelle. You keep on having names. And as we said, that all the children are compared to each other, which means that they have the talents and skills of the animals, and therefore they don't need us. Verse 19 he finishes. Before we get there, before we arrive, they've already given birth. They don't need us. They don't wait for us. Like they deliver the baby at home by themselves, and they don't wait for the midwives to come. And this was very dangerous, obviously, for them to do. To clearly disobey and not listen to an edict, a decree from Pharaoh himself to the midwives is obviously something that was very, very dangerous. So the Torah actually tells us very interesting that Hashem gave them a tremendous gift for the self-sacrifice that they had. God did good for the midwives. And what did God do, first of all, was that the nation multiplied. They became very strong. They multiplied and they became very strong. So here we are. Pharaoh's trying to wipe out the Jewish people, and in return, Hashem is making it that the Jews are become greater and stronger. No matter how much the Egyptians try to cause the Jews to cease having children, it's not working. The hard work's not working. Telling the midwives to kill the baby boys is not working. They keep on growing and having more and more children. And they feared God. So instead of fearing Pharaoh, right? That's what everyone should take in lesson. We should fear God before we fear man. And God gave them a blessing, and He made for them houses. God built them houses. So what does that mean? God gave them a nice, here's a gift. You have a nice house, nice two-floor house with 5 bedrooms. He says, no, obviously it doesn't mean that. God built them houses, meaning like families, like dynasties. The great and tremendous dynasties will come from these unbelievable women who, rather than listening to Pharaoh, feared God and did what Hashem wanted them to do. What did they have? So who were these 2 women that were Shifra and Puah they were the midwives? So one of them was Yocheved, Moshe's mom, and one of them was Moshe's sister Miriam. Okay, Yocheved will marry, as we're going to see in the Chumash shortly. Who's she going to marry? She's going to marry someone who's from the tribe of Levi. She's going to obviously marry Moses' father, who was from the tribe of Levi. And we know that Kohanim and Leviim will come out from, her son will be Aaron, the high priest. So she will merit to have the 2 great dynasties of the Levites, and the Kohanes will come from her. And Miriam will actually be a great-grandmother, her descendant will be King David. So because of their self-sacrifice and not allowing the Jewish people to get destroyed, the opposite happened. They got 2 dynasties that will come out, or 3 dynasties. Out of Yocheved will come the Kohen and the Levites, and out of Miriam will come the dynasty of the kingship, which is the tribe of Yehuda, which King David will come from, and so on. Verse 22. So the story continues. Pari commanded his whole nation, Lamer, saying, at this point, he says, I want not just the Jewish babies that are born to be killed by the midwives, but I want all boys, even if they're Egyptian, they should all be thrown into the river. They should all be cast into the Nile. Throw the baby boys, Jewish and non-Jewish, Egyptian and Jew, throw them into the Nile River. But the girls you could leave alive. You don't have to do anything. Why all of a sudden did he create this new decree? Rashi says that all of a sudden he is now throwing even Egyptian boys into the river. The answer, Rashi says, is because the stargazers again are guiding him, and they tell him they see that today, that day, Moses was born, and they did not know and he will be the one to redeem the Jewish people. Not that it was Moses. They see that the Redeemer of the Jews was born in that day. They obviously knew very well how to read the stars, however they did that. And these astrologers. And they said the person who's going to take the Jews out of Egypt is born, and therefore they should throw all the boys into the river. Now the Torah tells us we have to know the background to the birth of Moses, how this special leader was born. Here is where the Torah continues with the story. A man went from the tribe of Levi, Vayikach as Bas Levi, and he took the daughter of Levi. So a Levite married a Levite. Who are these 2 people? Very interesting. If you remember in the earlier class that I taught, we learned that there was a girl who was born right when they got into Egypt, right at the border. Right at the border. Who was that girl? That girl was Yocheved. Okay, if I'm not making a mistake, that girl was Yocheved. So Yocheved was from the first people that was born right when they entered Egypt. This will give us some timing here, the timeline. As soon as they entered Egypt, this girl Yocheved was born. Yocheved was a daughter of Levi. Levi was one of the 12 sons of Yaakov. Levi had a daughter whose name was Yocheved, and Yocheved was literally born right when they came into Egypt. Remember, she was pregnant before she came into Egypt, already in Canaan in Israel. And as soon as they came into Egypt, she was born right there, right when they got into the land. In Egypt, she was born right there in Egypt. Now we're holding, remember, Yaakov had to pass away, which was 17 years, and all the tribes had to pass away before the slavery started. How old is she now? She's very old. She's 130 years old. So it's gone by 130 years till the suffering, the Egyptians really start hounding the Jews and persecuting them and killing their babies and so on, when she's about 130 years old. And he says something very interesting. She married her nephew or her great nephew. She married Amram. So the husband and wife actually split up. They got divorced. Why did they get divorced? Because they knew that Pharaoh made this decree. Pharaoh made this decree that all the boys should be killed. So they said, we better get divorced. We better not be married, because if we're married, and we have a baby and it's a boy, then the boy could get killed. And they were leaders in the community. So all the men and women got divorced, all the Jews. And it seemed like Pharaoh's plot was working. He's going to stop the people from having children. So everybody gets divorced. So Miriam, her daughter, very interesting. The daughter goes over to the mother and says, Mom, what are you doing? You now are causing the natural, you're worse than Pharaoh, because Pharaoh made a decree that all the boys should be killed, but at least there'll be Jewish girls, there'll be a continuity of the Jewish people, but you are getting divorced and everyone's capping you and separating, and now you're causing that there shouldn't even be any Jewish girls. So what's going to happen? You're worse than, in a way, what you're doing is worse than Pharaoh. So they got remarried. They did their second marriage. They redid their marriage. They not redid, but they got married a second time. And Hashem made a miracle and she became young. And from that marriage, Moses is going to be born. So that is a little bit to the background of Moses' parents and where he came from. Moses' parents were Levites. They were distant, they were cousins. One was an actual daughter of Levi. One was a descendant, not the daughter. Yitzhar ben Kahas was a great grandson or great grandson of Levi, and they ended up marrying each other. Batar Isha, so she became pregnant. Bateled Ben, and she gave birth to a son. So Amram and Yocheved, right, give birth to a child. Batera Isaac Yitoiv, and they saw that he was good. They see this baby that is good. What does that mean? Every mother, father look at their child, see that they're good. But it's Bnei Shalish Rachim, Rashi says that the house became filled with light. They looked at this child and they saw he wasn't another regular child, but there was something very, very special about this boy. They could see there was a light that shone on this child, and they could see that on this child. So they hid him for 3 months, Rashi says. Why did they hide him for 3 months? Because he was born as a preemie. In those days, today I don't think it's medically possible, but in those days a baby could be born. Somehow maybe the way the pregnancy went a little different than today. Who knows how the world was a few thousand years ago. The bottom line is Moses was born 3 months earlier before the due date. Rashi says very interesting that the Egyptians knew that Amram and Yocheved got married. They knew the date of their marriage. They were tracking everybody's marriage, so they wanted to follow up with the babies and then kill the baby boy, right? It's like you have to file your taxes. You have to know when the marriage took place so that they could know which child will be born. So what they did was they waited 9 months from the marriage of Amram and Yocheved, and then they're going to follow up and see if they have a baby or not. So meanwhile, the mother gave birth a very early preemie, gave birth to the baby 3 months early. And during that point in time, they didn't have to hide him because nobody was coming to check up on them because they weren't married. It wasn't 9 months since the marriage. Okay, so they had to, that's what verse 3 says. They couldn't hide him. They were able to hold Moses at home like a regular baby for 3 months. And then they couldn't hide him anymore. So what they do, they needed a way to protect this child. They took a basket, a reed made out of reeds, some kind of like a thing that's pretty thick, solid, that could hold, it could bend a little bit, but could also hold strong stuff. They took this reed basket and they covered it. The chemis ubazefra, they took clay on the inside, they made it hard with clay on top of the reeds, and they put tar on the outside, right? So the water shouldn't seep through. And they put this kid into this fancy or simple, whatever, this floating basket that they made. When they put it in this marsh, like in the river, where there's still like weeds and stuff, in like a marsh area of the Nile edge, they went and they put the basket in over there to hide him. They shouldn't find Yosef. So when the police come and they're searching for the child, is there a child here from Amram and Yocheved? they shouldn't be able to find the child. Now Rashi just says they didn't put tar inside and outside because tar has a bad smell, and they didn't want this special holy child, Moshe, who was going to be a tzaddik, to smell the difficult smell. So the tar was on the outside and the clay was on the inside. Just a wet method of how they made that basket. So what do? His sister, meanwhile, stands from the distance, later Mayasel by what's going to happen to him. So I guess they can't keep him at home. What are they going to do with him? So they put him in the river. And as this story unfolds, great miracle Hashem makes happen. Pharaoh's daughter goes down to bathe in the Nile River. So she's going, that's where they would take the baths in those days. I guess in that area of Anarisa, and she's together with her maidens, the people who help her out and take care of her. And she sees this box, right? Pitch on the outside, made out of reeds, clay on the inside. And she sends her maidservants and she says, go get me the box. Okay, just a few Rashis here explain some of the background to the story. So, first of all, why are they telling us about her servants here? Rashi actually says that is going to say that her maidservants were actually arguing with her and telling her not to take the child. It was wrong what she was doing. They were actually trying to convince her out of it. And she didn't listen to them. And they ended up getting killed because they were standing in the way of saving Moshe. They were going to die. They needed to die, I guess spiritually, whatever, because they were standing in the way of saving Moshe. Some people say a great miracle happened, actually, that her hand stretched out, that Hashem, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why Hashem made this miracle, but Hashem made a miracle that it wasn't that she sent her maidservants to get the baby, but she was actually, a miracle happened, she stretched out her hand, and her hand shot many feet further than it's supposed to, and she brought in the baby. She was able to bring the baby in and save the baby in that way. But Tiftach, verse 6, she opens it up. Tira Sayel, and she sees the baby. She opens up this basket. What's this basket floating on the river, on the Nile River in the swamp area? And she sees this child. And it's a baby that's crying. And this mother shows compassion on this child. And she says right away, she says, this must be a Jewish child. Now, she sees the Shechina. Rashi says that, again, so there must have been something very special about this Moshe. Just even as a little tiny baby, a 3-month-old baby, you would look at him and you could see the divine presence on this child. So Moses wasn't a regular kid that later became holy. He was born already to begin with in this very holy state. She opens it up and she sees this as something very special, very holy. And she sees a baby that's crying. So what happens next? Verse 7. So the sister who's watching, remember, from the distance, says to Pharaoh's daughter, the princess, I'll go and I'll call for you Isha Meinekas, a mother that can nurse the baby. You know, the baby's crying. You want to find somebody to calm him down. We'll nurse him. In the Ibriyas, I'll find you a Jewish woman. And she'll be able to nurse the baby for you. Rashi says, a little background to the story. From here we see that why would she give the child up to a Jewish woman to nurse? And Rashi says they tried to give the baby to an Egyptian woman to nurse, but Moses would not, this 3-month-old baby Moses would not nurse from an Egyptian woman. Rashi says it was a miracle because Moshe was going to speak to Hashem face to face on Mount Sinai, mouth, straight from his mouth. Such a holy mouth that has to speak to Hashem. How could he nurse from Egyptian woman? So therefore, I guess it's like, I don't know, kosher milk. You got to have it from a Jewish woman. I'm not sure in halacha if this is any status, but the bottom line is it has to be from a Jewish woman, and the kid with a nurse, and he's crying, and she's probably trying to get him to nurse, and he's crying. So the girl says, I'll tell you what's going on. And it seems like she knew he was Jewish. I don't know. I'm not sure. I forget how I lived that a while ago. Actually, he was Jewish, maybe from the divine presence. Maybe she saw he was circumcised. However it was, the bottom line is, we got to get this kid a nurse, and I know someone that can take care of it for you. The princess, Pharaoh's daughter, said, go. So this young girl ran very vigorously, then she called the mother of the child. So this is like a real Jewish plot over here, some people say, you're getting the mother to be hired to nurse your own child. What a great plan. But it's amazing how Hashem made this great miracle take place. And the past Paro says to this woman, he says, please do me a favor, nurse this child, not knowing it's the mother, it seems like. And I'm going to pay you to nurse this baby. I found this baby. I want to adopt this child. So the woman took the child and she nursed him. In the wording, Rashi says, the word here, Heilichi, is saying, Heilichi, actually is like she was prophesying. She didn't realize what she was saying. She's like, here's your child, basically. But obviously she didn't realize even what she was saying. She thought that she was paying a woman to nurse a child. And the child grew up. Now, how old was he? I just saw something before that she was 12 years old. Basically, when the princess came back to collect Moses, they kept on saying he needs a little bit more time. We'll take care of him. And basically, as far as what I saw today, is that Moses actually lived by his parents for 12 years, till he was 12 years old. So he got a good education among these people. So the child grew up at Pare, and she brought him to the house of Paro. And he became a child, adopted by the princess. And she called him Moshe. So the name, actually, it's interesting, the name that's given to this man is by the Egyptian princess, Atimer, and she says, why am I calling him Moshe? Because I removed him, I saved him. Rashi has different ways of explaining it. I removed him and I saved him I drew him from the water, I removed him from the water, but Moshe got his name because he was removed from the water. And that's how the princess named Moshe. And that is where we have the beginning of the fascinating story of the redemption of the Jewish people. And it starts from today's Chumash, which we talk about the birth of the leader of the greatest leader of the Jewish people, who gave the Torah, was born in this miraculous, fascinating way. Any questions or comments on today's Chumash? No, we good? All right.
There is tons of commentary on that. I won't get into it, though.
All right. I'm saying if there's one point that someone wanted to make, the floor is yours right now. Otherwise, with Hashem's help, we'll move on to today's time. Very good. All right, awesome. Good. So we did today's Chumash.